When I first walked into the building on my very first day, 10 years ago, I had no idea that one day I'd walk out of it, fired, humiliated, but still holding the most powerful card in my hand. Back then, the company was nothing more than a bold startup with mismatched office chairs, two espresso machines that barely worked, and a handful of people who believed we could change something. Anything. I joined as a junior developer, eager to prove myself. And I did. Quickly. I wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but I was the one who stayed when others left. I was the one who refined, tested, and designed what would later become the foundation of our best-selling product. I still remember the night I stayed up, alone in the office, working on a feature we now call Vortex Sync, the real-time integration protocol that tripled our sales. That code, that idea, that patent, it came from me. But let me back up a little so you understand how it all fell apart. It started with the announcement of a new CEO. Our old one, Mark, was a good guy, transparent, empathetic, always ready to listen. But the board wanted aggressive expansion, and apparently that meant bringing in someone who had no loyalty to the people who built the company. Enter Richard Hale. He arrived in a black suit, perfect haircut, and the kind of smile you only learn in business school. The first week, he didn't say much, just watched, took notes, and fired 3 people from the marketing team. Week 2, he called a full company meeting. "We need to cut fat," he said, scanning the room like a general preparing for war. "Some of you may not be aligned with our future direction." I already knew I was in trouble. I had a gut feeling. I'd seen this before. The quiet ones, the builders, the veterans, they're the ones who go first. Then came the emails. Meetings I was supposed to lead got canceled. My budget requests for product development were under review. Suddenly, I wasn't being copied on updates about the integration I created. And then the real insult. A 24-year-old strategy consultant was placed over me. Her name was Harper. She called me sweetheart in meetings. And I knew they were preparing the ground. Still, I stayed silent. I did my job. I documented everything. I kept records. And I smiled, just enough not to look bitter. And then it happened. It was a Tuesday morning just after our weekly sync. The CEO walked in, unexpectedly. He stood by the glass door and said loudly, "Can I have your attention?" The room fell silent. "I want to personally thank one of our team members for their service, someone who's been with the company a long time but, unfortunately, is no longer aligned with our vision." He turned to me, smiled. "Thank you, Avery Lane, for everything. You're free to leave your badge at the desk." Just like that. People stared in disbelief. Some looked away. No one said a word. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even blink. I stood up, placed my badge down, and looked straight into Richard's eyes. "Thank you for the opportunity," I said. But in my head, "You just fired the person who owns the core patent your entire roadmap depends on." I left the building quietly. The air outside felt heavier. Not because of the weight of my termination, but because I knew what was coming. I walked to the train station in silence. No calls. No texts. Just me and the rising hum of my thoughts. All I could think about was that moment, that smirk, that arrogance. They had no idea. No idea that 2 years ago, when we were still a small company, I had taken a quiet but powerful step. I filed a provisional patent on the real-time sync protocol I designed. When the company didn't move fast enough to formalize it, I filed the full patent under my name. As an individual, I followed every legal step, paid out of my own pocket, and held on to the paperwork like a lifeline. And now, the same protocol they were preparing to base their next product line on was mine. I held the code, the design, the architecture, the legal ownership. They fired me, thinking I was expendable. But I was about to show them the cost of their arrogance. As the train pulled away from the platform, I looked out the window, replaying the last few weeks in my head. Richard, Harper, the meetings, the smirks, the silence of my so-called teammates. It didn't matter now, because I wasn't planning to fight back with noise or revenge emails or social media posts. I was going to fight back with strategy. And the war had already begun, they just didn't know it yet. They didn't just take away my job. They took my identity. For weeks, the house became a trench. The closed blinds blocked the light, but not the thoughts. The silence didn't come from the absence of sound. It came from the absence of purpose. Every room seemed to echo the same question. What now? Sleep was rare. Eating an effort. I, who had always been made of ideas, suddenly felt empty. As if being expelled had taken more than my badge. It had taken parts of me I didn't even know existed. During the first week, I avoided even my reflection. In the second, I started writing. Loose words, scribbles, streams of consciousness. But between the paragraphs, a pattern began to emerge. Memories of creation. Of the moment I planted the seeds of what they would one day call Vortex Inc. It was winter when the idea came 3 years before. I spent nights sketching possibilities on a makeshift whiteboard in my apartment's living room. The concept was real-time data flow synchronization, powered by an adaptive algorithm. It seemed simple at first, but the technical depth was immense. I pulled all-nighters testing, failing, starting from scratch. I rewrote the base code 5 times until I found a stable architecture. When I finally validated the protocol with 99.9% efficiency across multiple simultaneous servers, I cried. Alone, in the dark, with my forehead resting on the keyboard. The patent wasn't a fluke. I knew what I had. And in a rare moment of strategic selfishness, I filed it under my personal name. The licensing contract with the company was drafted by me, limited, with an expiration date, and without full transfer of rights. A protective measure. A survival tactic. Deep down, I already suspected that if everything collapsed one day, that invention would be my only shield. And it did collapse. Flashback. The executive committee room was packed. Screens displayed graphs and timelines. The CEO, Brandon Keene, stood up, excited, pointing to a slide with the projected profits of the new division. Thanks to the Vortex Inc. protocol, we estimate an additional $120 million in revenue over the next 18 months. This, gentlemen, is the future of real-time computing. Applause. Champagne. Toasts. He didn't even mention my name. At the time, I ignored it. I chose to believe it was part of the game. That eventually, my contribution would be recognized. Naive, I now realize. Weeks went by. And then came the first sign. I received the company newsletter. It said, "We're revolutionizing real-time with our new proprietary architecture." I followed the technical details. Every line was a disguised copy of my protocol. They changed the names, the terminology, but the foundation was mine. That same day, I scheduled an appointment with my lawyer. Angela Wu was meticulous, cold, and brilliant. We'd known each other since college. When I entered her office, the documents were already on the table. "You want to know if they can use this without you?" she asked, looking over her glasses. Yes. The answer is no. The license was conditional. They lost the right when they fired you. She closed the folder with firmness. "You have a case. A strong one." That's when it began. I didn't announce anything. No social media posts. No public statements. But my days became filled with discreet meetings. Angela began the process for an out-of-court notification. At the same time, I assembled a technical dossier, documenting every instance of unauthorized use of the protocol, every copied function, every inspired line of code. In the silence of my improvised office, the former dining room, I began building something else, a network. I reached out to former colleagues who had left the company. Some had access to internal documents, to emails proving that Vortex Sync was still being used. Others were ready to testify if needed. I contacted strategic investors. Some had grown disillusioned with the company's recent empty promises. I sent anonymous reports showing that the product wasn't as new as they claimed. I planted doubt. I also reached out to tech media outlets. Under pseudonyms, I started publishing articles comparing the original protocol with what the company claimed to have developed. The buzz grew. Seeds of scandal spread. Angela called me in for a private conversation. "Do you really want to move forward?" They left me no choice. She simply nodded. In the 6th week, we filed the first lawsuit. confidential. Civil, the charge, unauthorized use of intellectual property with an injunction request to block any product derived from the protocol. The CEO received the notification during a public event. Embarrassed, he dodged questions. Internally, emails began leaking. Panic. Denial. Internal accusations. But I remained quiet, like a shadow. Only I wasn't alone. Allies began to emerge. A smaller, but promising, competitor offered me a board advisor position. A venture capital fund opened the door to finance my own startup if I wanted to start over. The tech community embraced me once the full story came out. They published articles in my defense. The name, Avery Lane, began circulating, not as a victim, but as a creator. Every step I took was silent, but precise. No shouting. No direct confrontations. Just strategy. One of my contacts, now inside the opposing legal team, sent me a copy of the CEO's latest internal memo. Title: Potential Damages if Authorship is Confirmed. They were scared. Deep down, they knew they had messed up. And when they did, they messed with the wrong person. They thought I was gone. But they were about to learn what happens when you fire the wrong person. They launched the product on a Wednesday morning. A live-streamed event filled with vibrant banners and empty words. The stage setup in the company's headquarters felt more like a show than a technical announcement. Lights, music, rehearsed videos. And at the center of it all, Harper, wearing a confident smile, presenting the company's new protocol as if it were the fruit of collective genius. As if it were hers. But barely had the event ended when the bomb dropped. 2 hours later, a legal notice interrupted the celebration. A cease and desist order. Patent violation. Unauthorized use of registered technology. And the name printed in bold letters. Avery Lane. The protocol was mine. And now the law said so too. The servers supporting the new platform were forced offline. APIs were taken down. Access was suspended. Demos were pulled from the website. The launch campaign was frozen. The company's social media became a minefield. Furious comments, unanswered questions. What was meant to be Harper's big day became a legal and PR disaster. And the press? Oh, the press doesn't forgive scandals like this. The next day, the headline was everywhere: tech blogs, business sites, industry reports. Ex-employee owns the core patent of Vortex Inc.'s new innovation. CEO may have built empire on unauthorized rights. I didn't need to say a word. Silence was my signature. What spoke for me now were the documents, the official records, the investigative journalists who loved watching giants bleed in public. And Harper, she was bleeding. Inside Vortex Inc., chaos spread like wildfire. The legal department was thrown to the wolves. Emergency meetings went through the night. Investors demanded answers. The board wanted explanations. Shareholders threatened lawsuits. No one could understand how a product had been launched based on a patent they didn't own. But I knew. They knew. Harper knew. Her first attempt to contact me came discreetly, a politely worded email. Avery, I believe there's been a misunderstanding. I'd like to discuss a possible amicable resolution. I ignored it. My lawyers didn't. Days later, the company tried to argue that I had developed the technology while still employed, and therefore, the rights belonged to Vortex Inc. But the records, the emails, the development journals, and witness statements said otherwise. The patent had been registered in my name beforehand, based on research done off the clock, using my own resources. An airtight case. Nothing could undo it. Then came Harper's desperate move. She requested an in-person meeting. She offered money. A lot of money. More than I had ever seen in a single proposal. A percentage of the product. A leadership role. Even an apology, carefully rehearsed. I refused it all. The room went silent for several long seconds, long enough to make even the most cynical attorney uncomfortable. She looked at me like she didn't recognize me. Like it wasn't possible that someone like me would say no, but I wasn't there for money. Not anymore. Because it's not about numbers, Harper. It's about principle. About respect. About not letting power normalize theft disguised as corporate innovation. I wanted something that couldn't be bought. I wanted the lesson to echo. Meanwhile, pressure on Vortex Inc. kept mounting. Their stock dropped. Articles popped up detailing how the compliance team had failed. Internal investigations were launched. The hashtag Justice for Avery went viral. Tech influencers, entrepreneurs, even former employees began to speak out. A former product director admitted he had warned Harper about the risks months earlier. He was ignored. Another confirmed that the protocol had only one creator, and it wasn't the company. It was me. The war was won before it even began. Harper, cornered, tried to spin the story. She gave interviews talking about creative collaboration and collective effort. But it was too late. Public opinion was relentless. Her image began to collapse, not because of a mistake, but because of her arrogance in thinking no one would notice. That an idea could be stolen and turned into profit with applause instead of consequences. Then came the final blow. During a live-streamed open meeting with shareholders, one of them demanded formal explanations. A female investor stood up and, holding a dossier in her hands, read out loud excerpts from the patent filing. She said my name, the origin, the resignation, the attempted cover-up. It was a public dismantling, and no one could stop her. Not even Harper. At the end of the meeting, the applause wasn't for the CEO. It was for the courage of the woman confronting her. More offers came in. From other companies, investment funds, media outlets. Everyone wanted to align with someone who didn't just invent, but resisted. Someone who wouldn't sell her integrity for convenience. Now I could choose
whom to partner with,
whom to negotiate with. And Harper? All she could do was watch. Because I didn't want compensation. I didn't want compensation. I wanted the lesson to echo through every boardroom that ever silenced someone like me. It took weeks of strategic silence. No public statements. No interviews. No social media posts. Just quiet, precise, surgical actions. The media speculated, corporate analysts tried to interpret every move, and Vortex Inc. spiraled into uncertainty. While the company's lawyers ran in circles, issuing evasive notes and scrambling to contain the legal avalanche approaching, I was already several steps ahead. Because those who wait wisely act precisely. And I was ready. During that silence, a lot happened behind the scenes. My legal team worked relentlessly. We gathered documents, recordings, email records, original code, timestamps, and witnesses. This wouldn't be an emotional or moral attack. It would be a meticulous operation, with solid evidence and arguments strong enough to make any judge hesitate before ruling against us. Meanwhile, I regained something even more valuable than my invention. My clarity. It was on a gray late afternoon, a Friday far too quiet by corporate standards, when the phone rang. The screen showed an encrypted conference number. I answered in silence, and on the other end, I heard a polished, deliberate voice, slightly drawn out, like someone who had been waiting for that moment for months. It was the CEO of Quantum Core, one of the most respected and most dangerous companies in the tech industry. A direct competitor to Vortex Inc. One of the few players powerful enough to flip the entire board. "We've followed the news of your preliminary victory closely, Ms. Lane," he said, with the tone of someone about to propose something extraordinary. "And we'd like to talk about collaboration opportunities." Collaboration. The elegant word the business world uses to avoid saying what it really means: strategic alliance for profit and reputational gain. They didn't just want my technology. They wanted what it symbolized: legitimate innovation, a clean legacy, courage. They wanted what Vortex Inc. had lost. And they knew it couldn't be built internally. It had to be acquired, associated,
endorsed.
Negotiations began that very night. But it wouldn't be easy. This time, I set the terms. Ethical, technical, personal. Every clause was written in invisible ink made of memory. Every line negotiated with the weight of what I had lived through. I demanded creative control, absolute transparency, legal guarantees of authorship recognition. No erasing my name. No burying the origin of the idea under the mask of a generic team. The technology would launch, yes, but with my signature stamped on it. Not in the fine print. At the top. in bold, if possible. And it was officially recorded. Based on technology developed by Avery Lane. The launch was scheduled for an international innovation conference, one of the most watched events in the industry. Quantum Core handled every detail: lights, stage, story, marketing. And when my name appeared on the main screen, followed by the visual of the code I had written months before, the silence in the room turned to applause. They weren't applauding the company. They were applauding me. For persistence. For intelligence. For justice earned. Meanwhile, on the other side of the market, Vortex Sync began to crumble. It was like watching a massive structure collapse slowly as internal cracks finally surfaced. Strategic contracts evaporated. Partners backed away. Investors sold off in waves. Within 2 weeks, the company's valuation dropped 32%. What once seemed solid was revealed to be hollow, propped up only by facade and narrative. The board panicked. Emergency calls. Crisis meetings. Confidential memos circulated. But none were more important than the meeting called by the board of directors. At the center of the agenda, Harper Donovan, the woman who once trained me, who praised me in public and silenced me in private, who used my mind to build her glory, who used my trust as a stepping stone. Now she sat before the shareholders, without her confident smile, without the flawless blazer, without the memorized corporate script. She tried to justify her decisions, tried to downplay the crisis, tried to shift the blame onto lawyers and tech directors. But it didn't work. An internal investigation, silent, conducted while she was still in denial, revealed Harper had received legal warnings weeks before launching the product based on my technology. Warnings she ignored. Decisions made out of vanity. Gross mismanagement. Negligence. And worse, abuse of power. That was all the board needed. Her dismissal was announced on a cloudy morning in a brief memo. No tribute. No thank you. No pat on the back. The queen had fallen. And with her, a piece of the silencing, arrogant culture that had propped up that empire. As the market absorbed the news, my inbox filled with invitations. Consultancies, major firms, universities, foundations. Inviting me to lead projects, receive awards, take on high-ranking roles. The numbers were generous. The titles, prestigious. But I didn't want a title. I wanted purpose. And so I started again. From scratch. I rented a small room, nearly hidden in an old building downtown. A wooden desk, a laptop, a whiteboard. That was enough. There I wrote a new manifesto, quiet but resolute. I built a lean team. Hand-picked people. Not the brightest on paper, but the most principled. The ones with fire in their eyes and ethics in their hearts. People who knew the value of an idea. People who respected the origin of invention. People like me. That's when my new company was born. A real space of creation, intellectual freedom, and justice. With clear contracts, transparent policies, mandatory credit, an anti-system, a lighthouse, a quiet answer to the world that tried to erase me. Months passed, and then I received a new invitation. This time, to speak at an international conference on ethics and innovation. I had turned down many invitations before, but I accepted this one.
Because it was more than a speech. It was a reunion with myself.
On the day of the event, I wore simplicity. No designer labels. No symbolic armor. I stepped on stage with the calm of someone who no longer needed to prove anything. The audience was young. Entrepreneurs, inventors, artists, coders, dreamers from around the world. All looking for space.
For voice.
For validation. For justice. And there, before them, I told my story. Not with bitterness, but with strength. Not to attack, but to inspire. I spoke about the importance of protecting what we create. Of not selling our soul for a badge. Of not letting fear of retaliation silence our essence. I spoke of the power of time, of strategy, of patience. I spoke of how silence is not submission, it is preparation. When I finished, there was a second of stillness, and then a standing ovation. Long, heartfelt. And in that moment, I realized the victory was no longer mine. It belonged to all of us. As I stepped off the stage, a young woman approached, eyes filled with tears, voice trembling. "Thank you for existing. You gave me the courage to keep going." I smiled. I didn't reply with words. I just touched her hand, because some things don't need to be said. They are in the air, in the eyes, in the gesture. Later, a journalist approached and asked the question many probably wanted to ask. "How do you feel now after everything?" I took a deep breath, smiled softly, and answered, "They took my job, but I reclaimed my power, and that no one will ever take from me again."